This is my evidence card for my speech, and then these are my other ones. Okay, and then this. Okay. On November 22nd, 1963, our 35th president, JFK, or John F. Kennedy, was shot and killed. However, most are not sure how he was killed or who he was really killed by. And so, the JFK assassination is the biggest conspiracy in U.S. history. In 1963, JFK was at a parade in Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas, in a car, and as he was coming around the corner, that's when 3 shots were fired. The first one missed him. The second one hit him in the upper back and through the throat. That same bullet hit the guy that was in the passenger seat in front of him, and it hit him below the right shoulder and exited through his ribs. Then that same bullet went down to his wrist and through his left thigh onto the floor. And the third bullet hit him on the side of the head and caused his skull to shatter. The person who was responsible for this was Lee Harvey Oswald, who was in the Dealey Plaza behind JFK on the right side. So the bullet came in from the back. Later on, he ended up getting shot by Jack Ruby, who shot and killed him when Oswald was transferring from one building to the other. We found that out from the Warren Commission, which is an investigation of the JFK assassination, which was started by Lyndon B. Johnson. Later on, it was not released to the public until almost a year later in 1964. The Warren Commission almost started the conspiracies because it involved the autopsy and the video of the assassination. In the video, you could see the head direction was a little bit wrong. As said by David P. Jackson on January 4, 2014, in American Journal of Physics. One primary reason for these conspiracy theories is that the fatal shot came from behind the president, and yet his head jerks backward in response. At first glance, such a reaction seems to violate the laws of physics. After all, when a moving object collides with a stationary object, conservation of momentum would seem to require that objects continue moving in the direction of the original moving object. So if the stationary gets hit by the ball, it should go the same way, but it didn't. And so someone decided to prove it. Also said by David P. Jackson, knowing that no one would believe such a theory without experimental proof, Alvarez, or a scientist, and some colleagues fired bullets into melons reinforced with Scotch filament tape to simulate a human head, just as Alvarez had predicted. The melons were repeatedly driven toward the gun rather than away from the gun. So they made a melon just like a human head, shot it, and the melon ended up going up and back, just like JFK's head did. And so they stuck with the theory. The second conspiracy is the magic bullet that I mentioned earlier. As said by Eric Raddick and Patrick M. Grant in 2006 in Journal of Forensic Sciences, the bullet was to have passed through JFK's neck, entered the governor's body under his right arm, shattered a rib, exited through his chest, splintered his right wrist, and wounded his left thigh. Despite all this destruction, the bullet was recovered intact and relatively undamaged on a stretcher at Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas. So that bullet that passed through at least 5 exit and enters was perfectly intact, no blood or anything. So that was kind of strange, and that caused conspiracies. Then people started thinking, who did this? It can't just be one person. And after all, according to Jesse Walker in 2013 at Time.com, 2 weeks after the shooting, a Gallup poll showed 52% of Americans blaming a force larger than Lee Harvey Oswald for the president's death. Half a century later, a new Gallup poll puts the number at 61%. So 61% of Americans believe that Oswald was not alone in this. And so they believed these were the possibilities: the mafia, the CIA, and Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson himself. After all, Catherine S. Alsted in Diplomatic History in 2011 said the killing transformed the suspect from a figure of revulsion to one of mystery, especially when the nation learned that Ruby had friends in the mafia and did the real conspiracy to silence him. So they think maybe the mafia was very angry at JFK for what he did, since they did not get everything they needed, and he was trying to bring them down, and they were angry. And since Oswald got caught and he was in the mafia decided to take care of him so he wouldn't share anything. Another conspiracy is Cuba or the CIA. Ever since the Bay of Pigs incident, they believed that the CIA and Castro were angry at him, and they decided that they needed to get rid of him. As said by Laurent Gaynat in 2013 RedTurnsNewsNow.com. Douglas Tout. 3 people basically agree with the New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison perceived already in 1968. President Kennedy was killed for one reason, because he was working in reconciliation with the Soviet Union and Castro's Cuba. President Kennedy died because he wanted peace. He wanted to bring peace around everyone. They did not agree, so they decided just to get rid of him. And like I said before, the Bay of Pigs situation did not help much. Then the last person, Lyndon B. Johnson himself. They started to see some suspicious things coming from him, and so they decided to kind of blame him. As I said, and as Laurent Gaynat also said, Johnson's mistress of 20 years, Madeline Brown, wrote about Johnson's foreknowledge of the assassination in her book, and we repeat to anyone who cared to listen to Johnson, as he said this in November 21st. Tomorrow, those damn Kennedys will never embarrass me again. That's no threat, that's a promise. And also she said that she found that the day of his inauguration, he smiled and winked at someone after he was inaugurated into office, which is not a very good thing to do when your president has just died. So, because the JFK assassination was the biggest conspiracy in history, they weren't sure where it happened, who did it, and what happened to everything else. These are my note cards again.